Hello, everybody, and welcome back to News from the Heart. I'm Heather, and I have the honor of sitting with my guru and a teacher of many people, Swami Chaitanya. When I first met Swamiji, I was living in Southern California. You know, it's a big yoga scene down there. A lot of my first main teachers are in that area, and they are all over a bunch of the magazines, Yoga Journal. We even have LA Yoga. I met you and went, oh gosh, I've never seen him in these magazines. So I thought today it would be a kind of interesting thing to ask you about and your input about these magazines where a lot of our culture and our community are getting their information about yoga, and maybe why you're not more involved with them or what your thoughts are.
Well, I think the main reason that I'm not involved with them is because I'm too old and I don't fit their demographic.
You're not hip enough?
And so I think they have no interest in people my age. In fact, I think Yoga Journal a couple of years ago fired all of their staff and went out and moved their offices to Boulder and hired people under 35 only, I believe. So I think the yoga demographic today is women with children who are 35 and under, which is an extreme contrast to the circumstance that existed when I started practicing yoga in 1968 in Bloomington, Indiana, when there were almost no teachers and, very few practitioners of yoga, very few people interested in it at all. I think when I started, there was Satchidananda in the United States, Vishnu Devananda in Canada, Ramamurti Mishra was in New York, in Harriman, and Haridas Baba was about to come to Santa Cruz, California. And that was about it. It was, I think the emergence of yoga in the United States was a spontaneous response to the multidimensional failures of religion in the United States. I think it was a response to the failure of religion in the area of civil rights, in the area of women's health, and particularly in the area of defending and caring for the poor.
Maybe part of why the Hare Krishna movement was able to take ground.
I think
Is
that's
that what
no.
Oh.
Hare Krishna's demographic was mostly, heavy drug addicted, urban, lost souls.
And what were you referring to when you talked about that?
I wasn't saying that yoga was particularly responding to the needs of the poor, but rather that because of the failure of the churches in the United States to live up to the ideals that they professed, people started looking for alternatives.
And so now in popular media like Yoga Journal, I hear what you're talking about. They're meeting a demographic to some extent.
Well, I think what happened was yoga succeeded. And yoga succeeded in part because of us. I mean, we are the oldest American-based yoga community in the world. I am the first, disciple of an American disciple of an Eastern master. And our community has existed now for 45 years.
How does that, I hear what you're saying about the...
What has happened is that due to the success of yoga in responding to at least some of the needs of people in the United States for a whole different paradigm. I mean, in some sense, Americans were looking for something, didn't know quite what they were going to find. Yoga presented them with a model, and in that model, we have evolved. We have evolved to the point where now, the tantric tradition is the predominant perspective that engaged by yogic practitioners. And we have a completely different view of, a very strongly alternative view to the perspective of Christianity. And, just to give you a very simple part of that, we would say that in Christianity, the body is viewed as the location of temptation. Temptation to sin, which is the ultimate, deal breaker with God, that denies us, the right to any kind of peaceful or joyous afterlife. Whereas yoga says heaven and hell are now. What is here now is always, and what isn't here now is never. And, it is, the body is not the location of temptation, but rather the body is the divinity in this world. And, the body is the condensation of ultimate divine awareness, manifesting itself as the whole universe and the body. So that's a very simple that's just the beginning of it. It goes on and on and on.
Do you think that the media that covers yoga in this country gets that message across?
Of course not. And I think that...
Because I hear the definition that you just gave of yoga, it touches me. I don't know if people reading those magazines are... You could read 10 issues of those magazines and I don't know that you'd get that message.
So true. But the reason I can say that is because the predominant theory underlying asana practice gives us access to the experience of, the energy movement within the body, which gives us access to the understanding that the body is a manifestation of the divine in this world.
So they're getting that beginning step.
Right.
Okay.
But that's what yoga, in yoga studios today, this is the predominant model that is taught. I don't see them, first of all, I don't read yoga magazines. There's no reason for me to do that. And, it is somehow, and I think to some degree, thanks to a number of people and teachers in Southern California, yoga was transformed into a business and, basically became what I call vanity yoga. And today, yoga is is a huge market. There are something like 20,000 yoga studios in the United States and something like 30 million practitioners of yoga regularly in the United States. That's a pretty extraordinary change.
I'm in my head laughing at the oxymoronic title of vanity yoga.
True.
They don't go together. It's not even possible.
Well, it's all about, feeling, for them it's all about feeling good and looking good. Or, well, really it's the reverse. It's about looking good and then feeling good about looking good. But, yoga has nothing to do with either of those things. And in fact, the truest yoga practitioners probably don't look that well or look that great because they're paying no attention to their physical form at all. What they're really doing is, honoring their body and sustaining their health in ways that allow them to do even deeper practices than asana practice.
Wow, it's another fascinating topic to think of, that ultimately a healthy body doesn't necessarily look like what we think a healthy body would look like. But we can talk about that.
Well, we already know that, the Vanity Yoga model, or the Vanity Fair, image of what is a healthy body has nothing. We know that has nothing to do with anything. Every individual body is unique and, manifests its vibrancy in a unique way.
It's challenging to be ourselves, which is what yoga is encouraging us to do, and be in this country, in this world, and operate. How does one of those, I'm not quite a 35-year-old mother demographic, but we'll call it close enough, not think about how I look and how I interact, and not integrate that into my yoga practice somehow? I don't know. That's interesting. The magazines
At some point,
are tempting in that way.
Of course. Well, and in fact, they're intended to be tempting, because yoga has been completely co-opted by corporate America. And so now what you have are groups of yoga studios. I think, what was the yoga studio on Montana Avenue in Santa Monica? The people who owned that yoga studio formed a corporation. They bought other yoga studios. They created, their own PR mechanisms to promote their teachers. They went into business. They developed a corporate model. Kirpalu is, another. Amrit Desai set up this corporate yoga model. He brought in investors, who promptly kicked him out, and took over, and they have, the largest yoga teacher training mill in the world. They just run people in, throw a completely standardized training at them, and, run them out. And they're producing lots of yoga teachers.
Who love their practices? Who feel a connection?
I'm not. One of the things I think is that having a lot of yoga is a good thing, but having a lot of people who are teaching yoga who have no experience at all in the depth or profundity that yoga makes available for a human being and having a bunch of people teaching yoga who are essentially representing a corporate model as, sort of the goal of yoga is well, I suppose what I should say is it's typical, because that is just the way certainly things in America and in the modern world work. Anything that is successful is hijacked for the purpose of making money. And, when I started doing my teaching, and when I started this community, I did it for love, not for money. And we have always had businesses, and I have always supported myself, doing other things besides teaching yoga, because I felt like it was really important that, people practice for love and not for money.
I will say, in the defense of those journals, I've seen a few good people with lineages get in there, and I want to see the good in everybody and believe that the editors and publishers of those magazines have an intention of love, and they have to pay their bills, so maybe they're targeting a demographic to do that. But it's still interesting. It is still
anything is
interesting to me that
possible.
you haven't been in there. I mean, you live in Malibu. You've got hundreds of students, thousands of students in California and the West Coast, and
the next thing is this. I have never crafted my life, with the idea that I was going to create a worldwide movement.
you're not in there because you haven't made an effort to be in there.
I am not a movement person. I have always believed that if I invest energy in my roots, that I will grow in the ways that are appropriate for me to grow. And if and so I don't network, and I don't pursue any kind of external offers to, outside the ashram to teach. If they come to me, fine. If they don't come to me, fine. But I think that, yoga is not about making money. We shouldn't, and now there are lots of people who become yoga teachers, perhaps with the idea that they were going to make money as a yoga teacher, who've now realized that's completely impossible because there are so many yoga studios that nobody is really able to have that big of an audience, and running a successful yoga studio is a very, very hard job.
It's just like being an artist or an athlete or a musician in this country now, unless you end up lucky enough or maybe talented enough, but usually lucky enough to become one of the rock stars in your...
Well, and the truth is that the rock stars, are willing to allow themselves to be structured so that they reach the largest audience. And the largest audience always, means the lowest common denominator. And unfortunately, the lowest common denominator most always means some kind of tension. So, I think it's really a sad thing that yoga has become corporate in the United States. I think that yoga for money is an oxymoron. I think that yoga really represents our best shot at one of the key elements in sustainable community that we are going to require if we will survive into the coming eras. Many people think humanity has another 1,000 years on the planet and it's over. And that's very interesting because, the dinosaurs lived for about 300 million years. Some species of fish have lived for at least that long. Why are human beings only going to survive for about 1 million years? Well, because we're so stupid that we have destroyed, our beautiful planet.
We're so powerful at the same time as so ignorant. It's interesting.
We have evolved so rapidly that we have not, that the environment has not developed any counterbalances to keep us in check. In any case, I think if we are going to survive longer than 1,000 years, yoga is one of the key elements that we need to, develop ourselves and around which to develop communities which are genuinely sustainable. So when I see these days publications like Yoga Journal or any of the other yoga publications, really responding to a corporate business model and taking, a business school approach to marketing their content, I feel a little bit disappointed because I believe that the real potential available to us personally and communally, the real potential in the practice of yoga is not being considered in the slightest. And it's not being considered because, in that there is a deep discussion. But it's also not being considered because, that deep discussion requires a spirit of conversation which is not available to people who are competitive with one another in creating their followings, as yoga rock stars.
That was very powerful for me. Thank you. Whether you're doing asana yoga with I know some beautiful yoga rock stars out there with beautiful hearts, and they're featured all over Yoga Journal and those magazines, but there is a deeper conversation being had. Some of them may be having it or starting to have it, or certainly it's available here. But I hope you all look beyond those pages and beyond your classes into that deeper discussion. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you again on the next episode of News from the Heart.